Kellerman out of the door. And we want to read from two articles. One of them is from Awful Announcing, with the headline that says, Dan Le Batard says ESPN tried to kill Max Kellerman with schedule, treated him as disposable. And then we have another article from The Spun, which basically says ESPN accused of horrible treatment of longtime host Max Kellerman. So I want to start off with this Awful Announcing article, and then continues on, and it says, Max Kellerman has been out of the public eye since he was let go by ESPN last summer. Kellerman held a lot of roles on ESPN over the years. Most recently, he hosted an afternoon TV show, This Just In, with Max Kellerman, and co-hosted morning show Keyshawn Johnson, J. Will and Max on ESPN Radio until his departure from the network in June 2023. Recently, Brian Kenny told Brandon Contest of Awful Announcing podcast that Kellerman would emerge from the shadows later this year, but what that entails remains to be seen. For now, ESPN is paying Max Kellerman essentially to go away and be shelved for the duration of his contract. For his contract has drawn a lot of responses, including from Dan Le Batard. The host of the Dan Le Batard show with Stu Gatz revealed Wednesday that ESPN asked him something similar when they were negotiating his exit from the network. Max Kellerman, at the center of those debate show wars, was collateral damage on something. Le Batard said in a conversation on his show with Miami radio host Jonathan Soslow. If you were watching what was happening to us at ESPN, they tried to kill Max Kellerman after we left by giving him the morning sports radio show. And the reason I bring you into this, Zaslow, is because I believe ESPN's strategy of figuring out the most people are disposable, including they're saying Stephen A. Smith, when Burke Magnus talked about go on without Stephen A. Smith publicly. You are the beneficiary of what it is that's changed at ESPN. When they have realized that they can get a person who's a professional radio host, and they don't have to give Max Kellerman's of the world the morning radio slot. Max Kellerman was a prodigy in this business. Max Kellerman is Exhibit A on how you have to be careful about how disposable the pieces can be. The original incarnation of Around the Horn was with Max Kellerman as host. He thought he was more valuable than that. He was a prodigy. He was a prodigy in sports television and sports radio. And according to to Le Batard, ESPN's response to Kellerman's overestimating his worth was to pluck Tony Reali, pardon the interruption intern, straight out of the office hallway. Reali has since become the face of Around the Horn for the last 20 years. And I just want to quickly see what this other article had to say from The Spun. It just basically went on to say, when ESPN parted ways with Max Kellerman, many sports fans were surprised. Kellerman had been a staple at ESPN for years, appearing on multiple shows, and in several different segments. He had his own show covering his favorite sport, boxing, in the months leading up to his dismissal. Kellerman also hosted a morning show with Keyshawn Johnson and Jay Williams, and another former ESPN personality says that time slot was the beginning of the end of Kellerman. Max Kellerman, at the center of those debate wars, was collateral damage on something, said Le Batard on his radio show, speaking to Miami radio host Jonathan Soslow. And that article goes on to say a few other things there. Look, it was clear. It was clear that Max Kellerman wasn't going to make it on ESPN. It was absolutely clear. When you give him that time slot, it's very, very hard to perform well in that time slot, right? I think now the people that replaced him, I think, are the Pat McAfee show. I think the Pat McAfee show currently occupy that time slot, but it's a very difficult one to do well in, right? There are some shows, however, that have figured it out. If you look at First Things First on FS1, with Kevin Wiles, Nick Wright, and Chris Broussard, they do a fantastic job, but it's a very, very difficult time slot, right? And I think a lot of people, you see, I think during the cord cutting that took place at ESPN, there were a lot of big names that I think people were upset that they left. Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, Jalen Rose, Max Kellerman. But I think what made it worse, or rather what made it different with Max, is the dynamic that existed between himself and Stephen A. Smith, and the things that Stephen A. Smith had gone on to say after Max Kellerman's departure. That's what kind of created a different scenario. I think that also plays into the fact that plays into the whole kind of movement of people wanting Max Kellerman to come back stronger than ever. As you guys know, Undisputed will be parting ways with Skip Bayless next month. So that seat will be empty. They didn't say they're canceling the show. They said that seat will be empty. And I said on some of the shows surrounding, when we're breaking the story, I said that I felt like, look, if they're looking at any possible replacements, I think that they should look into